growing up struggling teaches you to overcome those obstacles that are put there.
Sure.
And I think a lot of times, if you put an obstacle in front of, for example, my children, sometimes it's a little bit of a stumble for them because they don't have that ability to push through.
Wow.
I'd never seen a dead body before. So the first time, guys had gotten into an argument and they started shooting at each other and they shot the kid in the head. We get there and the guy's laying in the street and it's like you can see the person's there, but they're not. He would laugh because I had stopped the car full of death.
Yeah.
They were all dead. And so it was a cluster. I mean, it was probably like my second traffic stop ever.
Oh, God.
Right here in Austin, Texas, in the summer of 2020, just like so many cities, our feeds were full of images and videos of all kinds of protests and calls for change. Maybe I'm alone, but one of the natural questions I had in that time period is, what if you were a part of multiple different groups at the same time that the media at large would consistently pin against one another? In a time where our culture is as divided as it's ever been in any of our lifetimes, today we're sitting down with Zena Bryant, who has spent decades in law enforcement and shares her experiences and insights with us today in a way that I'm sure is going to challenge every single one of us. Here's Zena Bryant.
So I grew up in Columbus,
Okay.
60s. A lot of cities back then are segregated. You're from Cleveland, so
Yep.
So Flytown was an area that was predominantly Black. At that time, Vietnam War is going on, and I have my grandmother's house is kind of a house where everybody kind of hangs out at.
Yeah.
And I was like on her leg all the time. She's a great cook. She's a hairdresser. I mean, she did a little bit of everything. And so they would congregate at her house and they played chess on the porch all the time.
Okay.
And so my uncle, Andrew, he had some friends, Doodle and Diggs, but they all went to Vietnam. And there was a lot of people that went to Vietnam that didn't return. And their group, actually, all three of them ended up coming back. And at that time, everything was you got a great job, coming back. So my uncle, he became a mail carrier, and Andrew, and then Doodle became a fireman.
Right.
And Diggs was a police officer.
Okay.
And because I hung out with my grandmother so much, I would just sit there on the porch and just kind of listen to all the stories that they would tell. And so, my uncle was always some dog that's chasing him through the neighborhood and Doodle there at the fire department sleeping and exercising. But Diggs would have the best stories, as far as, they went out and, some guy that gave him a hard time or, some guy that he kind of, you get out there and it's a domestic violence situation and he kind of turns the table on the guy that's the abuser.
Yeah.
I just really looked up to him. And then another part of it is in that community that he policed, I know everyone. So I can put a face with all the stories. It was just a great time. It was a great community. We had a lot of fun. We were real cohesive.
Yeah.
They taught me a lot and I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And it was a time that I felt safe.
Yeah.
I felt safe. I felt loved.
Yeah.
And, it was just real engaging.
That's powerful. Yeah.
And it was probably, hands down, it was the best time to ever grow up.
Yeah.
I think.
Wow. And do you think, not to skip too far forward in your story, but would you trace some of your inspiration for where you went with your career to some of those days and some of those stories? Do you think part of your interest began there?
I'm sure that it sparked a lot of curiosity, and those stories always kind of stayed with me.
Right.
I'd have to say he was a great inspiration. He not only was he a great person for our community, and especially in his position, but he was a great person. He was a friend of our family.
Yeah. Wow. What would you say maybe you were most grateful for growing up in the environment you did, and what would you say is maybe like the greatest challenge about your childhood there?
The thing that I was most grateful for growing up, I would say, is family. There was no one in the community that you didn't have a relationship with. So one of the places that I loved growing up was called the Godman Guild.
Okay.
So it was a nonprofit organization, and they offered a lot of assistance to the community. And it really strengthened our community. There was so many things. They'd have block parties,
Right.
We'd have rummage sales, everybody bring something. And you just got to know everyone, and it was a great asset to the community.
Wow.
So when those communities are strong as a whole, as a city, as a state, and as a country, we're a lot more cohesive.
Wow.
And I think those things have kind of gone away.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a nostalgia in hearing you describe it. That's like, oh man.
Yeah. I wouldn't trade the feeling of being safe,
Yeah.
the feeling of being loved,
Yeah.
to grow and to be nurtured with everything, and to see all those. Everybody contributes,
Yeah.
to that. And so that would be the thing. Growing up in Flytown,
Yeah.
I wouldn't change it for anything in the world.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So the thing that was most negative is being poor. My grandfather was a bricklayer.
Okay.
That's what he did by trade. And my father, in turn, that's what his sons did. And in Ohio, it gets pretty cold.
Yeah.
And during the winter, there's no work.
Yeah.
And I can remember being hungry. I can remember, just my dad not knowing what he's going to do to feed his family, and bundling up and trying to go out and do something to take care of his kids and support us. But he's a great man, and he worked hard. But even with that part of my life, I wouldn't trade.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trade where I grew up, the people that got to shape me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. What would you say to, somebody who, we live in an affluent area in Austin, Texas. What would you say, somebody who hasn't had that experience, what do they miss, or what's different, or what do you maybe grow up thinking, having a different perspective on the world?
If I had these conversations with people before, I think the thing that you miss when you do come up with those things is growing up struggling teaches you to overcome those obstacles that are put there.
Sure.
And I think a lot of times, if you put an obstacle in front of, for example, my children, sometimes it's a little bit of a stumble for them because they don't have that ability to push through.
Wow.
And so I think that's a great strength when you come up with in wanting or needing.
Absolutely.
To have something. So.
Absolutely. And you said track for you was kind of an outlet. It was a thing you could control, work at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a big part of your story, right? In the high school and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you're in that, everything that you see daily is normal. No matter, someone else doesn't see it as normal, but it is your normal.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what happened with me is I was very talented. And so a lot of the programs would gift me. They do scholarships, if someone would write a grant or those type of things. And so I was able to compete on a lot of the more elite programs that they had in Columbus.
You had an opportunity to follow track out of high school and chose not to, right? Is that kind of the word?
No, it was chosen for me.
It was chosen for you, okay.
Because so I was a really talented athlete.
Yeah.
I was a terrible student. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't. I didn't put in forth effort that I should have. When I went forward, I had Ohio State was looking at me to be on in their track program. They had set me up to meet with Garden State, Kansas.
Okay.
They had a really good junior college program,
Right.
JUCO. And I did all the stuff, and then I just I didn't follow through with it.
Sure.
You know, sometimes when you're handed things, I shouldn't say handed, because the talent was just given, you know, God given. And I didn't treasure it the way that I should have. And so I didn't pursue it. I made a poor decision. At that point, I wasn't going to college.
Okay.
My dad was a very great man, but he was like, you know, I'd rather see you dead than doing nothing, you know. And so, you know, so he didn't want us to fall into the pitfalls of staying at home and, you know, getting caught up and continuing to be in poverty. And I ended up going into the military.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so tell us about your military experience.
I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and froze my butt off. I went in November of 85. And so when I was running track and we traveled a lot, is when I learned that everything that I saw every day wasn't necessarily normal.
Yeah. Your eyes are kind of being opened
Your
up.
eyes
for the
open
first
up.
time. Yeah.
And so I knew I wanted more. And so I saw the military as that avenue to get me away and to start me on a new path. And so I ended up going in, and I was a 93 Papa, which is a flight coordinator for the Army. And I went to Fort Dix, and then I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama for my schooling. And by that time, I ended up getting married. And got out of the military. And we ended up in Denver. Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
So,
and this is the beginning then of your police career, right?
The beginning of my police career. So I start there and working at Wells Fargo. So I would go and restock or replenish all of the ATMs for the King Super stores in the Denver metro area. And so while I was there, it was a guy, he had just gotten out. And so we both ended up working at Wells Fargo doing the ATM runs. And he started talking about he wanted to test for the police department. It was the Aurora Police Department. It's a suburb of Denver. And so we took the test together. So we take the test and I get a better score on the test. So he's mad. So then we go ahead and then we ended up on the board, and I ended up getting on and he did not. So, and so I went through, my badge number was 9111.
Oh, there you go. It feels appropriate.
So the guy in front, the first person in our class, he was 911.
Oh, wow.
So, Gregory Dupree. So it was pretty cool. And I started there, and I learned a lot in that time. You gotta remember that's back in, so I started in 91, and at that point, you know, anytime that the economy is down, there's always, people do what they have to do to survive. Now, don't get me wrong, you have the people that are gonna do that regardless. They're gonna steal and rob. And then you have the people that are on the fence. And then you have the people that I have to take care of my family. So now your pool is a lot bigger as far as when crime goes up.
Sure.
I learned a lot because you had to learn a lot. You know, and the calls are back to back, you know, shootings, you know, stabbing, robberies, domestics. And anytime tensions are high, domestics go up. And so you learned really quick because you had no choice. And so I remember a sergeant, when you go through an FTO program, a field training officer. And I ended up, there was a guy, Sergeant Boyle, great, really good guy. He would laugh because I had stopped a car full of death. They were all dead. And so it was a cluster. I mean, it was probably like my second traffic stop ever.
Oh gosh.
And so and so a lot of times when they're, you know, trying to explain, you know, and they're trying to read your lips, And then when they're talking, they're very loud, and it's very so. I ended up having some cars come and back me up, and we finally get through it. We do a lot of riding, and we get it all taken care of. And he was laughing. He's like, "How do you, on your second stop, you stop a car full of deaf people, and because no one knows how to sign."
Yeah.
The hardest part of law enforcement is communicating.
Sure.
Because even if I know what I want to say.
Yeah.
And I know what I want to do. But if that's not what you're perceiving, it's, and that's where a lot of the miscommunications come from.
Yeah.
But anyway, we finished up I won't tell you that story. So anyway.
You can if you want to.
Oh, you don't know that story. So there's a guy, his name is Stackhouse. And Stackhouse is probably, family has a little money. I had stopped this guy, he's an African guy, and he called himself Fufu. Uh-huh. So I'm doing that because every time you gotta pat everyone down. So I'm patting him down, and I get here and I go, what is that? And he's like, no, you don't do that to Fufu. So that's why I said I wasn't gonna tell a story. Well, Stackhouse that same night, he's patting the guy down in his pocket. And he's like, "What is this?" And the guy's like, "It's my dick, fool." So when we get in there that night, they go, we would always have to practice our arrest control and on. Yeah. So they call me and him up, and they go, "Okay, we want you to show us the penis you can get and the penis that you can't," because you would say the gun that you can get and the gun that you can't. It depends on how you're going to, take the person down. So, but we had a lot of fun. And anyway, when we get to our rotation, when we're finished with Sergeant Boyle, he's kind of talking to all of us. "I can't guarantee that any of you guys are going to finish the program." He says, "If I was a betting man, I'd bet on Vaughn." I mean, at the time it was Keelan. I got married. He said, "I bet on Keelan." And he was like, "Because she knows how to talk to people." And that's half the battle. And he says, a lot of it is I remember going out, and there was a lady, and she had called, and she's just crying, and she's complaining about the neighbors, and she's complaining about her kids. And I had a female FTO, her name was Denise. And so we get in there, and I'm young, I'm new, and I'm trying to figure it out. I just tell her, the lady, go sit down, help the kids, get them to the table, change a couple diapers, and she just has that moment to sit down, and that's all she really needed.
Wow.
My job isn't just to go out and arrest, and my job is to go out and problem solve, and that's what was needed of me that day. Sometimes the job is just to be human.
Wow. Well, that's powerful, because that feels transferable to so many things. And like, if people bought into what you just said, and I don't think people often think through law enforcement in that way that aren't in it. And it's a refreshing, helpful way to think about it, frame it, approach it. I'm curious about, anybody who has a job of any kind has a stressful day at work, stressful, time period at work. We all go home, complain, this happened today. What was a stressful day like for you, or what was a hard season like for you in your stretch there in Colorado?
So I would say the hardest period of time and stretch, and the most stressful, was probably in my first 5 years in the 90s. Just the call volume. I'd never seen a dead body before. So the first time, guys had gotten into an argument, and they started shooting at each other, and they shot the kid in the head. So we get there, and the guy's laying in the street. I think it's just, I don't even know how to describe the feeling of, to sit there and it's like you can see the person's there, they're not. And it was kind of, I was sad. I was a little, freaked out to see someone laying there with, you can see the life like draining out of them is, I guess, the way I would kind of describe it. Because you can still see them and they're warm and they're, you know, it's just, that was the hardest thing for me. I didn't.
Who supports you then in something like that? Like, you can't prepare for something like that, right? I mean, what's available for you, or where do you go when you're...
When I first started out in law enforcement, there was a group called Nicoletti and Associates, and they supported our police department.
Okay.
I didn't go at that time. So you just kind of lean on the other officers, you know, but it was, I think there's pieces of it that you think you don't have them, but they kind of linger and they stay with you.
Yeah.
So the hardest one for me was, he was an engineer. He was working down in the Denver area, and he had just gotten a really great promotion. I want to say he was going to be making something like $400,000 a year, and he had gotten a DUI. And he saw himself as a failure to his family. And his wife had left and went to work, and she thought that everything was fine. And she came home that night, and he had shot himself in the mouth with a .357. And that was the hardest of all for me, because the face that you have when you do that is the face that you have when they find you. And it was like 8 hours later, and the rigor mortis that set in. And I mean, his face looked like a Halloween mask. Just, I mean, he just had pure, you could see in his last moment that he was like, what did I do? That one I couldn't shake. I kept seeing it. You know, when I went to sleep, I'd see that face. And that one by far was the one. And then that's when I realized I really probably needed to talk to someone. So, yeah.
My wife and I talk, you know, so my wife's a counselor, and we'll talk about this sometimes, where, you know, somebody might come in from one traumatic event in their life and being counseling for it for years. And I think about, there are certain people that do like what you do. They're, you know, paramedics, police officers, military is, you know, maybe most extreme, but that it's like witnessing and being around traumas on a daily basis, multiple times a day. And I'm like, I can't even fathom what you then have to carry, and how you stay, how do you, you know, even maintain a compassionate, open heart to care for people, and yet do that every day. You know, how do you not? It's just, to me, as a world, I don't know that, unless you've experienced it, that most people could understand the weight of what you have to carry and go through.
It's hard, and I know, you know, that I don't know exactly how it's ranked anymore, but I know for the longest that officers had one of the shorter life expectancies. In the time that I was there, I knew 5 people that took their own life. And it can be very difficult. You know, with me, what I tried to do was, you know, number one, I went and I spoke to someone, and I think that's very important. And the other thing is that I tried to have friendships and relationships outside of law enforcement, because, you know, a lot of guys, you always heard the choir boys, you know, that's where all the officers just got off, and afterwards they went and they drank, you know, and that doesn't fix the problem. It only...
Do you feel like it's common for officers to get help or to talk to somebody, or do you feel like it's taboo? Do you feel like it's changing over time?
So in the beginning, when I first started out, I think it was taboo, especially for the guys. Even for me, I didn't want the guys to think that, you know, I wasn't strong. As time went on, you know, I would say I thought more of the female officers, you know, just in my little world that I was exposed to, that we used it more often than the male. But here lately, you know, I mean, I do think that I've seen a lot of changes that I think are positive.
So you're there for, you said 12 years in Colorado, in Aurora, and then is Austin the next stop? Is that when did you go straight there?
Went to Killeen.
Oh, okay. clean.
Fort Hood. My husband was military.
That's right.
He was on recruiting duty. I met him. So I took a break
Yep.
for a couple years. And my husband was going to be getting out of the military. He had enough time. So the decision was I moved to, if I left from the police department, I could take my 401.
Mm-hmm.
If he was to get out of the military, at 14 years, you walk away with nothing.
Gotcha.
So I ended up coming down here, and he got deployed. That's when the Gulf War had taken off. So he was deployed like the first 5 years of our son's life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 3 years out of the first 5 years of my son.
Okay.
But once I knew he was getting out, I knew I was going to go back into the workforce. And I ended up getting on with Austin Police Department.
Okay.
So
And you were doing night shifts.
I was night shift,
Yeah.
Adam's night. And
Yeah.
then my husband goes through the academy,
Yeah.
and then he gets nights in Frank. And so we're commuting from Killeen.
Oh, okay.
So Adam's sector
Yeah.
is over off of Lamplight
Yeah.
and Palmer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Frank is all the way south.
Okay.
And so we had 2 boys in high school
Okay.
and then 1 in elementary school.
Okay.
And we realized we were both going to be, after he gets out of the academy, he's going to be on nights, I'm on nights.
Yeah.
And we just made a decision that we weren't going to allow the boys to raise themselves.
Mm.
We purchased a house here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we purchased a house here, and I ended up leaving, and I started working for the Pflugerville Independent School District.
Okay.
So,
Well, I do want to finish with Pflugerville, because I love the way you've talked about what you're doing now and your passions about what you're doing now. But before kind of landing on that, I would be curious. So I was living in Austin in 2020, and you could have been living anywhere in the United States in that time period. But in our city in particular, you were a part of 2 groups, 2 identities that if you opened any news channel, any social media platform that you would think need to be pitted against one another, right? And we had marches for Black Lives Matter downtown. We had marches for defund the police downtown. And I'm just always curious. I'm like, well, what about people that belong to multiple different groups that have multiple different, how are we supposed to do this? And so, we've talked about this, we talked about this in the pre-interview that with Story 512, we just have a fundamental belief that there's more about the human experience that unites us and divides us. And I'm curious for you, granted, I know this didn't start in 2020, your lived experience has been longer than that. There's just, of course, a highlight in that season. And I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of all police officers or all Black people or all women or anything like that, but just in terms of your personal experience, what were you feeling, experiencing? What do you perhaps wish people knew, or what questions do you wish people would ask? I just want to kind of leave it open to you. But
I think if people, because what you say is very true. Mm-hmm. There's more of us that are alive than there is that's not alive. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I do believe we need to get back to where we can kind of agree to disagree until you're stepping on someone else's ability for life and for, to be safe and to have the ability to have success in their lives. And I think people paint with a big brush way too many times. There's no way that you'd ever go out and say, I support all of this group here, and there's nobody in that group that can't have done something that they're not supposed to. And I think that's where, it's kind of funny to say Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. And you're like,
it's a false dichotomy.
But and it is.
Right.
You look at it because in those groups, there are people. What's the rule? What is the 10% rule? Or 10% of people are rotten. You know what I'm saying? 90% of the people are good. You don't say all people are good because there aren't. And that's where the big problem comes. The big fight is that in law enforcement, we are our own issue sometimes because we say that we're going to support law enforcement. Yeah, we should when you're doing the right thing. But if you're wrong, then you should stand up against that wrong. If you do the right thing morally, we wouldn't run into half of these problems. Is all Black people doing the right thing? No. Or most? Yes. Do you want me to say I support all Black people, no matter what they do? And so for both entities, I don't. If you're wrong, you're wrong. And I think that's where it gets really, we're so busy wanting to fight. This is what it is. That we throw all common sense, all moral, all honesty. We throw all those things out the window, saying we want to support a group. And I just think we need to support right. And we don't stop to think, maybe we're wrong, and maybe we should educate ourselves a little more. And so, and I think everybody should take a little time to see something outside of what they're comfortable in seeing. I think my biggest strength in life is that I try to be honest and I try to be fair.
Well, it sounds like it's something that's been core to who you are for a long time, affirming, earlier in your career, this ability to listen and communicate. And you're like, goodness, if we could do this, on a large scale, but it starts with each individual to do that. Now with your role with Pflugerville ISD, right? Okay. And you have a specific way that you describe the kids that I love. That if you could explain for us how you see them, your heart for them. I thought this was really inspiring.
Well, my 1,000 little Zenas coming through the door.
Yeah.
and I do every day.
Yeah.
When those kids come through the door, the parents are sending us their best. That's their best, and I'm going to give them my best. When I say 1,000 little Zenas, it's because I know I'm not perfect, and I have my days, and so I try to understand that when I deal with each student. I'll run into the kids and I'll say, "Oh, so Brian, you don't remember my name?" And I'm like, "No, because you were a honey or a baby,"
Yeah.
Because they did everything that they were supposed to.
Right.
That I couldn't say your name is Hal Ryan.
Yeah.
Number 68725, your student ID number. Because those are the students that I tell them, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here for you to make sure that you can get educated and that you can do it safely.
Yeah.
That's my job. But I had a student, one of them, he got in touch with me about, I think after I spoke with you guys, he's going to be a DPS. He's going over to state trooper side. But he was a kid, he never did anything absolutely terrible. But he just wouldn't comply with anything. And what they'll have is that you can have so many referrals and they'll send you over to the Opportunity Center, which is the alternative campus. And they were going to send him over to the alternative campus. And we actually had a big meeting. And when we went in there, his mom asked me to come and speak. And so we went in there and I talked, and the principals and, the ones that wanted him to go gave their side. The ones that thought he would benefit from staying on campus, we spoke. And they ended up allowing him to stay. They didn't send him over to the Opportunities. And so he wrote me this beautiful letter. He put it all on the card stock and he took his time. And he thanked me for coming and speaking up for him. And so he ended up going forward and he went to TSU, Texas Southern University.
Okay.
He got his bachelor's and just finished his master's program.
It's incredible.
And I still have the card that he made for me.
That's so great.
And so he called and asked would I be a reference for him, but that he had started the process with. And he told me that he wanted to do it like I do it. So, I love him. I've stayed in touch with his mom.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of him. And it's those things that that make me continue to want to do it.
Well, that's why we even sit down and have these convos and want to hear people's stories. Like you said it so quick, but you said I love him, you know, and just how many people think about that, you know, hey, an officer might love me, you know what I mean? Might be there for me, you know, not against me, might, you know, and that comes across as so evident just in speaking to you. And if we just have those conversations, you know. Well, not to like I put you on the spot, but it's just, is there anything else that you'd want to share? Like I'm inspired by, you know, how many different ways in which you've impacted people, served people in a various, you know, amount of roles and capacities. And in your experience on the other side of humanity at worst and best sometimes, right? Is there anything else like you'd share? You're like, man, I just wish people knew, did more of, would ask this question more, you know, anything like that hits you?
I think I wish that people would just be more willing to listen and come out of their comfort zone. You know, I can remember being somewhere and, you know, when you go into a room, you naturally gravitate towards things that are familiar. That's human nature. Sometimes we need to stop doing that. Sometimes you go sit with the old person or the Black person or the Hispanic, you know, and I think with me, I've always been in a position where I'm always the minority, whether it's being the female or whether it's being, you know, that I'm Black. And I think just me, because I talk to everybody, I'm willing to come out of those comfort zones. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do me or be me, but I think every now and then you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And then you learn a lot.
Yeah, 100%. Wow. Well, thank you not only for sitting down and having this convo, but also I just feel like a gratitude towards how you've lived your life. I mean, I'm grateful for how many people and the ways that you've served. I'm so convinced it takes a very special character, heart, compassion, love to do what you do. And I don't think that there's very many people that can do what you do. I think can learn from what you've shared and be more curious. And I love getting uncomfortable. Even that thought of walking in a room and where you gravitate, that's so helpful. But you're definitely a special human being. And so I really appreciate you sitting down and trusting us, sharing us, you know, with us.